Okay, here we go. Let's start our story. We are on page 360 of our book. And there's the poor king. Look at all his paperwork. Yikes, that's how I feel sometimes. Here's this beginning paragraph. Let's take a look at it, please. It says, before the American Revolution, most people who had come from England to settle in North America were English subjects. That means they belonged to England. They were loyal to King George III. However, some of these colonists did not like that the king made them pay money called taxes to the English government. They did not like that they had no say in the decisions made by the English government. This was the beginning of a disagreement that led to the American Revolution. Now, why do you think our author put that paragraph in the beginning of the story? I mean, what's the reason for that? Do you think maybe they're just setting the stage? They're just getting us ready, making sure we understand what's going on before we start? I think maybe that's the reason. Okay, let's get started. When George came to the throne, the government was costing a great deal. England had been fighting a long and expensive war, and when it was over, the question was how to pay bills. Finally, a government official suggested that one way to raise money was to tax Americans. What a good idea, King George said. After all, the French and Indian part of the war had been fought on American soil for the benefit of Americans. So why shouldn't they help pay for it? The fact that Americans had also spent money and lost men in the war didn't seem important. Nor did the fact that Americans had always managed their own money up till now. They were English subjects, weren't they? Didn't English subjects have to obey the English government? So, in 1765, a Stamp Act was laid on certain printed items in America. Now, who's asking these questions? Is the king saying this, or is the narrator saying this? They were English subjects, weren't they? Didn't English subjects have to obey the English government? Who's saying this? See, it's not in quotations, right? This is a direct quote from the king. But these are not. So the narrator is asking these questions from the king's point of view. But she's not quoting him directly. Okay, page 361. Follow along in your book. I'm hoping everyone has it. But I'm showing you the pages just in case you don't. Okay, here we go. King George was amazed that Americans objected. He was flabbergasted that they claimed he had no right to tax them, just because they had no say in the matter, just because they had no representatives in the English government. What was more, Americans refused to pay. If they agreed to one tax, they said, what would come next? A window tax? A tax on fireplaces? Okay, so what's going on with the king and his people here in America? Clearly, he doesn't really understand them, does he? He doesn't really know how they feel. He thinks they should feel one way, but they sure don't. Now, King George believed that above all, a king should be firm. But the government had the vote. And in the end, it voted to repeal the tax. That means to take it away. Still, King George was pleased about one thing. The government stood firm on England's right to tax the colonies. That means, even though they took that tax away, the Stamp Act, the government still said, well, we do have the right to tax them. We're just taking that one away. And in 1767, the government tried again. This time, the tax was on lead, tea, paint, and a number of items England sold to America. Part of the money from this tax was to be used to support an English army to keep order in America. Part was to pay governors and judges who were previously under the control of the colonies. So now they would be under English control because they're getting paid by England. Who could object to that? King George asked. I think I know. Let's read what this says here on the side of the page. It says many Americans disapproved of the Boston Tea Party. They were willing to pay for the lost tea, but when instead the king punished them so severely, they became more united against him. The Americans did object. They hated the whole business so much, especially the English soldiers stationed in their midst. Do we remember what midst means? Like among them. Remember I told you that they had to even open their houses and let the soldiers live there? That even when the other taxes were repealed and only the tea tax remained, they would not put up with it. When the tea arrived in Boston, they dumped it into Boston Harbor. When he heard this news, King George felt more like a father than he ever had in his life. A father with a family of very, very disobedient children. And of course, he must punish them. So he closed the port of Boston and took away the right of Massachusetts to govern itself. Wow, the people really got mad, right? When he punished them, they got mad and they were like, forget it now. We were going to pay for that, but now we're not. Now, do you see a simile on this page? Remember that a simile is a comparison between two unlike things using the words like or as. Do you see a simile on this page? King George felt more like a father than he ever had in his life. A father with a family of very disobedient children. So instead of a king, he feels more like their father, and they're just being bad kids. Oh, there's a lion. And some sheep. That's a weird picture. I like the dog with a bow in her hair. Firm, firm, firm. From now on, he would be firm. After the Battle of Lexington and the Battle of Bunker Hill, King George said he felt strong as a lion. What's that? Simile. People would soon see, he said, that Americans would back down, meek as lambs. What does meek mean? Kind of quiet and shy and don't cause any disturbance. So he's comparing himself to the lion and the colonists to the lambs. I think this king is not functioning in reality. This is not what's going to happen, is it? Instead, on July 4th, 1776, Americans declared their independence. Naturally, King George was annoyed. But he wasn't worried. How could children, however rebellious, succeed against a firm father? How could a few colonies hold out against a powerful empire? He'd just send a few more regiments over and then watch the Americans come around. It never occurred to George III that he might not be right. Now listen to this, what he says. This is interesting. I wish nothing but good, he once said. Therefore, everyone who does not agree with me is a traitor or a scoundrel. Now, what does he mean by that? What is he saying here? I wish nothing but good. Therefore, anyone who does not agree with me is a traitor or a scoundrel. I think what he is saying here is that because he has good intentions, I mean, he wishes nothing but good, he has good intentions, that he has to be right. Just because you have good intentions doesn't mean you're always right, though. But he's saying that because he wishes nothing but good, he has good intentions, that makes him right. And anyone who disagrees with him is a traitor or a scoundrel. I think his logic is a little flawed here. Okay, let's continue. For a while, King George had every reason to feel confident. The English troops captured New York, and when George heard this, he said, "One more battle and it'll be over." When he was told that his troops marched into Philadelphia, he ran into the Queen's room. "I have beat them," he shouted. "Beat all the Americans." But he hadn't beaten them. The fighting went on, and meanwhile, George III had to go about the business of being a king. He put his seal on official papers, gave out medals and titles, memorized the name of every ship in the Navy, tasted the food sent to the troops, checked on who was spending what, and for hours on end, he listened to people talk. So, what does our narrator, our author, what does she think about being a king? What is it like being a king? It's kind of boring. She almost makes it seem boring, like he's just doing a bunch of silly little things like memorizing the name of the ships and tasting the food and like just listening to people talk. So, what kind of a tone is she setting here? How is she making us, how does she feel about the king? I feel like she just sort of feels like he's kind of out of touch and just kind of in his own little world of boring, goofy little things that he has to do every day. I don't know. Do you disagree with me? What do you think? All right, it's time to turn the page, but I'm going to stop the video and I'll start again on the next video.